Nearly 300 years ago, humanity experienced an upheaval. Portals opened across the earthly plane as the elven peoples arrived. They did not come as conquerors, no, but as refugees from the destruction of their plane, Sindaris. By their own hand was their downfall wrought, their advanced magics and seemingly an unending war between dark and high elves was their undoing. Millions died on Sindaris as the planar ties were destroyed and the dimension sank into the void. With them, they brought their magics to Earth, and their pride. Faced with millions of unmagicked, and by relative terms, primitive humans, High Elves sought to impose their will upon this earthly plane. Even in their diminished state and numbers, they were too much for humanity, caught largely in the Middle Ages and with technology no more advanced than cannons and sailing vessels. The Arrival War was waged for 14 years before the first signing of the Treaty of Seers. A tenuous peace was achieved, but in this peace, the oppression of humans became too much to bear. A leader demanded change. Oh, he was no elected official or politician speaking to the unwashed masses from an ivory tower, for there were those humans too, although few and far between. He was a pauper and a leader of the slums in the largest city on the Somnian continent, Vilitria. It was his intention, however, not to sue for justice and never to make an impassioned speech. Hearts and minds were never his goal. It was revenge. The Red Dawn. As the elven magi slept in their beds in the clifftop district of Vilitria, Cassius the Butcher, as he has come to be called in later years, and his band of assassins struck down the elven elite, undone by their own anti-caste laws, a measure taken to control arcanic instability. Routed from the city, the elves fled north to the elven-dominated city of Coldrock, the seat of the Archon and the Magus Arcana. The Archon, enraged at the slaughter of hundreds, declared war. But the Archon had a secret. It was largely believed that although magic was introduced to the earthly plane upon the arrival of the elves, humans were incapable of its use. The Arcana, according to the High Elves, simply would not respond to anyone of non-elven blood. But the Archon had an apprentice, a young human woman whose capabilities with magic surpassed that of even most elven practitioners. As the rekindled war reached a fevered pitch, the elves were driven back to the Fortress of Last Stand. The Archon began to open a portal to bring his people to the safety of a different plane, knowing full well in so doing, the arcanic instability would destroy the earthly dimension. Torn between loyalty to her mentor and loyalty to her people, the Archon's apprentice made her choice. She struck down the Archon, and the Fortress of Last Stand bears the scars of her decision. A chasm in the earth opened, splitting the fortress in two and leaching the instability, known as flux, into the surrounding territory, now known as the Lost Lands. She vanished then, and no one knows to whence she fled. The second signing of the Treaty of Seers brought about another tenuous peace, but with greater provisions for the plight of humans upon their own plane. Magic schools are opened in Vilitria and Coldrock, which, in theory, welcome human apprentices. Humans are allowed roles in government, and not as simply mouthpieces for elven leadership, but through a fair and equal electoral process, at least according to the governing bodies of the city-states. As time wears on, however, cracks begin to show in the new system. Uprising and subterfuge seem inevitable, and war is always on the horizon. Welcome to the continent of Somnia.